Hello, welcome to this webinar on the Nonprofit Security Grant. I'm Nick Blevins, and I'm excited to share with you about how your church can get up to, now it's actually $200,000, at least for this next one coming up, in grant money for church security. And I'm actually recording a video now that's kind of a pre-video for the actual webinar. The webinar was something that we've already done. It's a replay that you're going to watch. If you can't watch the whole thing right now, no worries. You'll get an email the next day with the full replay that you can watch. But I'm recording this video because there's some important new updates that you need to know right now if your church is interested in this. So in the video, in the regular webinar, I'll walk through all the details of the security grant, what that is, how churches can get it, what you can use it for, what you can't use it for, how you apply. Like anything with the government and with grants, it is tedious. There's lots of red tape, but it's very doable. In fact, we helped a bunch of churches get that grant this year, which I'll talk about more. But I'm recording this video right now to give you a heads up about some news, and I'm even going to share my screen here in a minute and walk through some of that with you. So normally, this nonprofit security grant opens up, and you can apply for it every year, typically around April, May, and then the deadline would be like May something or June. Now, every state's deadline is different, but they're all usually in that range. That happened this past year when I'm recording this in 2024, and churches received the grant money and all that. Usually the applications are, due in April, May, and then it closes, and then it's announced in August, September. This year was a little later because the budget wasn't passed until a bit later, but that's how it went. However, around the same time that the grant was open this year, there was an announcement from the federal government that there was an additional I think almost $400 million added to this grant. Some of that, I think 180 or 190, they just applied to the regular grant window that was open in April and May of 2024. But another 210 million, they did not, and they just announced this week, that at the time I'm recording this, that money is now available as almost an additional round. So think if you can normally apply and get it, April, May is when you apply and you find out in the fall. Well, now this is an additional round, and in my state, I live in Maryland, the deadline is December 10th. So November, December is pretty much the window for this additional round. So I would highly encourage you that if you're going to go after this grant, again, watch the rest of the webinar to learn all about it, to apply to get it in this window, which you'll have to move fast, but that's okay. We helped a ton of churches earlier move fast in May to apply and get it then. And then the good news, too, is if you don't get it in this round, no worries, you're ready so that when it opens up again, which it almost certainly will open up again next year, you're ready. You'll have all your stuff. You can apply again. My church actually applied for it in 2022 and did not get it, and then used the exact same application in 2023 and got it for both of our buildings. And because we applied for 2 buildings, we actually got more. At that time, it was $150,000 max per physical address. We applied for 2 physical addresses and got 250 grand. Could have had up to 300. Now with this new change, and I'm going to start sharing my screen here to walk through some of this, you can actually get up to $200,000 in money per physical address. The same rule still applies, that it has to be, let's see if I can change the look of this a little bit. It still has to be three max physical addresses is the most that you can apply for. Okay, let's see here. See if that works a little bit. This is, if you Google Nonprofit Security Grant Program, you will land on their main webpage, which is right here. And again, this is a federal grant. You're going to learn more of this if you watch the rest of the webinar. I just want to go over the key changes that you need to know right now as you watch this month or next month. So if you Google Nonprofit Security Grant Program, you'll end up here. And there's a bunch of things, resources, links here. If you scroll down, here's the notice about what I just told you about, the additional $210 million they're making available across the country for this supplemental grant. So normally they call it the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. See the NSGP there? This version, this supplemental is called the Nonprofit Security Grant Program National Security Supplemental. Government loves their acronyms and long names. So as you can see here, don't pay attention to this deadline. That is not your deadline. The way this works, and I'll explain it more in the regular webinar, but FEMA has a deadline of when states need to submit their applications. Your deadline is whatever your state says it is, probably late November, early December, something like that. if it's similar to mine. So this is just a little notice right here about this additional round. If you scroll down, you can start to see, here's the details about the money. It's another $210 million. So far in 2024, they've allocated $450 million towards this, which is a lot. So in 2023, it was the highest ever, and it was $305 million. Originally, this year, it actually decreased to $270, but then they came with that additional $180 something, which pushed it to $454. And then now there's another $210. So this is a big deal. You're going from, 2023 was $300 million to 2024, when it's all said and done, will be $454 plus the $210, a little over, $650 million. So if you keep scrolling too, you can see the checklist, some grant writing tips, the investment justification checklist. Investment justification is their term for the application. And some of these, they're almost like blog posts in a sense, where they'll have these release dates, and you can read like, here's the information about this new supplemental grant. Here's the fact sheet. Here's frequently asked questions. And I'm actually going to go to the key changes, because that's just what I want to highlight in this video before you watch the webinar. I'll cover everything else in the webinar. So this is an additional supplemental grant. Basically, they don't usually have two of these a year. There's usually the one. This is a bonus one. $210 million will be awarded. None of that matters for you. It's now $200,000 per physical address instead of $150, which was what it was this year before. So, I mean, if you have a church that has 3 physical addresses, maybe you have 3 locations, or you just have multiple buildings, you can apply for up to $600,000 in, each year. And the other thing is, you can keep applying for this grant even if you get it. Now, you're less likely to get it once you've gotten it once, but you can do that, which again, I'll cover in the rest of the video. This is new. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, and I don't cover it in the regular webinar because it's new. But essentially, they have this thing now where one organization could kind of be the parent applicant of a bunch of sub organizations, and think of them all as a consortium. The thing I would say though, and like, they all have to be eligible. You can't have a nonprofit that's the parent and then it's like a for-profit company beneath them. So they all have to be eligible. It's a way to make it like, think about it like if a church had 3 church plants that they've planted, and so it's 4 different organizations or something like that. The way I'm reading this, which I'm obviously new to this literally just came out yesterday. Or at least I was aware of it yesterday. The one church that planted the other 3 could maybe be the parent and apply for all 4 churches, and they each could get up to $200,000 per site, and then one would kind of manage all of it, if that makes sense. So most churches aren't going to do that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. That's not the same as if you're multi-site and you're one church but with 3 locations. In that case, you're still one organization. You can apply for $200,000 per address, but only up to 3 addresses. So one of the churches I helped this year get it, they have like 9 locations, and they applied for 3 of them, and they got the grant for those 3. And they'll have to apply in future years for the other locations. Now, here's another important note. Part of the reason they added more money to this and approved this is because of what's going on with the war in Israel and Hamas. And so they are actually going to favor applications where that organization, because again, it doesn't have to be a church, it could be any nonprofit, could be a bigger target because of the war going on over there. So see here, and it says by a factor of 4, meaning any church or organization that has a clear connection, as they say here, between the heightened threat they face and the Israel-Hamas war in their project will get 4 times the chance to be awarded the grant. Now, does that mean most churches aren't going to fit this, right? So I would encourage you, if you're thinking, oh, that's not us, this isn't worth it. No, it's totally worth it. I don't know, but I kind of doubt that, 90% of their applications are going to have a strong connection with the heightened threat because of the Israel-Hamas war. Will 30% have it? I don't know. But, let's say it's 20%. Okay, great. Well, those 20% probably going to get approved. But there's still 80% of that money available, and you don't have to have this clear connection and a heightened threat due to the war to apply for it. So I still think you should apply. However, if that is you, and off the top of my head, like if your church does something with refugees, If there's been some kind of incident in the past that would connect, I mean, it's got to be a clear connection like they're talking about. You definitely want to apply. But for the rest of us where that isn't really us, then, we're probably not going to apply here. And they give some examples here, which, again, some of these aren't going to apply to Christian churches. Okay, so that's everything that's, highlighted there, the differences between the two. The main point that I want to get across before you watch the rest of this webinar is act now. Like if you want to apply for this and hit it by the deadline of my state's December 10th, some other state might be November 23rd, some other state might be December 18th. I don't know. It just depends. It's still rolling out. So a lot of states right now, if you Google Nonprofit Security Grant Program and your state, a lot of states don't even have their website updated because, and I'll explain this in the rest of the webinar, but you apply for this through your state, and then your state applies to FEMA. And then FEMA talks to your state, who talks to you. Like you never talk to FEMA, and FEMA is kind of like, but they're the ones that administer or that like give the grant out. But your state is almost like your liaison or your ambassador or agent, whatever you want to call it. That's how you apply. And so your state deadline matters a lot. Now, at the end of the webinar, one of the things that we talk about is how we can help you if you want to apply, if you want our help with Ministry Boost, help you apply for this grant. This year was the first year we helped churches. We helped 42 churches apply for the grant. We've heard of all the ones we've heard back from, because now it's late enough that most of these people have heard whether they got it or not. Of all the people we heard back from, only one of them didn't get it, which is pretty amazing because that means 95% or so of the churches that we helped have gotten it. Whereas in a normal year, like take 2023, for instance, only half of the organizations that applied got it. Does that mean we are special? No. I really think it just comes down to if you can get help with this, that'll really increase your chances because there's easy mistakes you can make along the way. There's lots of things that are confusing, and it is pretty tedious. And so if you want our help, we'll talk about that at the end of the webinar. But certainly, even if you don't use our help, please try to get help somewhere so you're not doing that alone so that you'll increase the chances your church will get it. And go into it the mindset that, hey, I'm going to apply this time for this bonus round if I can get it in fast enough. And I'll apply again next year if we don't get it. Or even if we get it, maybe you apply again next year to see if you can get some other things for your church to improve your security. We want to help your church. We want to see it be secure. Honestly, this is not even really what we do with Ministry Boost. We primarily help churches recruit volunteers and build healthy ministries. But we've kind of fell into this because we did it in our church. In fact, one of the things I do want to show you is going back to share my screen. My church won the grant in 2023. And I just want to give you a peek at what we have had installed since then with the grant money. Again, we got $250,000 across 2 addresses. So this is the camera system that we got installed. You can see this. I'm recording this late at a night when like nobody's there. We're replacing these 2 cameras right now because, well, not replacing. We're actually moving them indoor and putting a different type of camera outdoors. There's our facilities guy. Actually, the last shot was him taking it down. But those are some exterior cameras. So obviously the lights are off in a lot of these rooms because nobody's there right now. But we have a system that has, I don't even know, how many cameras does it say here? On the side here, we got 15 there, 28 there. So 43 cameras. Door control, meaning think like a badge that gets you into a door. You can, like from here, I can see the doors. I can click on them and see which camera's closest to them. We can schedule when they open and close. People get in and out via their phone, via the app, or using kind of a card. Think like the kind of card you hold up and tap, and then it opens. And then, of course, it also runs our alarms as well. And so all of that, that alone was probably $210,000 of our $250,000 grant. So we still have more things to get. We're getting some lighting and some other things like that. But I just wanted to show you that so you could see what it looks like, what that money could turn into for your church. Now, you're going to want to watch the rest of this webinar to get all the details, all the information you're going to need. I just didn't want you to miss out on this important update now. If you have any questions, email me at nick@ministryboost.org. And if we can help you get this, let us know. You'll have a chance to get the security grant guide product at the end. If you're not going to use our help, no worries, please. I just want you to get this grant for your church and find somebody that can help you out, give you the best shot at applying. But one of the things I would tell you, and we'll talk about this, is just be prepared to apply multiple times. Like, you might not get it year one, but you could get it year two. So if you can spend the time on it, it's not, the money is free. It is a reimbursement grant, but the work, it does take work. So you're definitely gonna put in the work to apply for this. And then if you get it, it's a whole other batch of red tape, because that's just how it works. But it's worth it. It's worth it. We have this now in our church and we love it. And so I hope your church can have that too. All right, now let's jump into the regular part of the webinar where I'll talk all through the grant and what it is and how you can get it and what that could look like for your church. Who am I? I'm Nick Blevins. I'm the pastor of Next Gen Ministry and Operations at my church, co-founder of an organization called Ministry Boost. Ministry Boost exists to provide online training and coaching and resources for church leaders, mostly kids and youth ministry leaders. That's kind of the world that I live in, and my business partner who helped start Ministry Boost, that's mainly what we do. But we couldn't help when we were getting this for our church. And right now, as I'm recording this, actually, we're having some of this money is being spent and installing cameras and different things in my church in about 2 weeks. Yeah, in 2 weeks. And so we felt like, hey, this isn't normally what we do. We're normally helping kids and youth ministry and next gen pastors recruit volunteers and build healthy ministries. But this is something we think every church should know about. So that's why we're doing this webinar and helping out this way, even though it's not normally probably what we do. I'm also a search associate for the Slingshot Group, helping churches hire staff specifically, again, in the kids, youth ministry, next gen ministry world. And I wrote a book called The Volunteer Playbook. If your church needs to recruit more volunteers, which is probably most churches, I'd encourage you to check that out. My business partner, Kenny, who's not going to be on this webinar with me, he's also a next gen pastor, co-founded Ministry Boost with me. He also is a search associate with the Slingshot Group. He was at the church years ago where we first heard about this nonprofit security grant. The security director at his church at the time, who's actually still there, was former FBI or police, I can't remember. So he knew about this grant years ago, 15 years ago, and has gotten it multiple times for his church. And that's how we first learned about it. We'll talk about how you can get it multiple times as well. So that's who we are. That's what we do. Let's talk about the grant. So what is the grant? The grant exists to help nonprofit organizations prevent and protect against terrorist and other extremist attacks. It's really not about preventing crime or burglary or vandalism or anything like that. There's a place for talking about some of those things that may have happened at your church, at your facility, but it's ultimately really about preventing terrorist attacks. And we all know, I mean, every year, sadly, there are attacks on churches that we hear about nationally. There was one a few months ago at a very prominent U.S. church where shots were fired. Somebody tragically had died from that. And so these kinds of things happen. And so the nonprofit security grant was started to help harden facilities to help prevent those kinds of attacks. So that's what it's ultimately about. It's not really about general church security and helping your church be secure. It's more about helping nonprofits be secure to prevent those specific kinds of attacks. So here's some facts about the grant. It is a FEMA grant, FEMA national organization. However, it's administered through what they call the state administrative agency. All that means is it's administered through your state. I live in Maryland, so when it's almost like my state and your state are almost like your ambassador or agent to FEMA. Like, you'll never talk directly to FEMA. You'll always submit things and talk to your state. Your state will talk to FEMA, come back to you. So it's kind of like your state is kind of the intermediary that way. But it is a FEMA national grant. Many states have their own state level security grant. That's a different thing. You could apply for both. Some of them will specify that you can only apply for it if you don't get this one, but some of them don't. So I would encourage you to check out your state as well. You might be able to apply for a state grant in addition to this national grant. It was started in 2005, so it's been around for a long time now. Recently, one of the years had 5,200 applications for a total of $600 million. That's how much money was applied for. And they gave away about $300 million. So you can see already about half the organizations that applied got the grant, which to me, a coin flip odds for up to 150 grand or more, whatever the current year is, that's pretty good odds already. And that's without, we'll talk in a little bit about how um, churches and nonprofits mess this up. And if you can not make some of those mistakes, I think your odds are better than 50% that you could get this. So who can apply? Registered 501c3 nonprofits. Now, churches, houses of worship, don't have to be a registered 501c3 to apply. Churches by nature are, automatically allowed to apply for this because that's part of who they're trying to help protect. But it could be a nonprofit educational facility, not a public school, not a public college, but if it was like a nonprofit educational facility, medical facility, senior center, care facility, community or social service type of building, a camp, but those have to be 501c3s. All right, what can you get? This is a big question. Like, okay, if I can get up to 150 grand or more, what can I use it for? You can use it for access control, like think improving the doors, putting access control on the doors. So instead of like a key, you now have like a badge that hits a scanner and that's what unlocks the door, and you can remote open it with an app on a computer, on a phone. So that can be used. Barriers, fencing, bollards. Bollards are those concrete pillars that you see that would stop somebody from like driving a vehicle into the front of a building. So any type of barrier, fences, even like blast resistant doors, windows, blast resistant covering to go on the doors. Like if a bomb went off out in the parking lot, the window would be better protected because of that blast resistant covering. Security cameras, that's probably one of the most common things people use. It can be used for contract security as well. Training your team. Then there's certain types of training it can't be, but some types of training. And up to 5% of the total amount that you get can also be used to pay for the management and administration of the grant. So for example, in my church, I didn't do that. We didn't set aside extra money to pay me because it's part of my job. So I'm just spending my time, which you will spend time on it. But we're going to help you spend less time through this webinar and some other things. So I'm not doing that, but you can. That is an option where up to 5% can be used to pay for whoever is helping manage and administer the grant for your organization. What you can't get unallowable items such as force-related training. So like I mentioned, you can use it for training, like maybe CPR, or here's how to use your fire exits, or here's how to use our camera software. You can't use it for we got somebody in that's going to do some MMA training in case somebody comes in, or I don't know, here's how combat close quarters firearm training for if something goes down. Like you can't do that. So anything force related can't be used on that. It can't be used specifically to buy license plate reading or facial recognition software. You might get and choose a camera option that can do that, and that's okay. You just can't use the money to specifically get that, if that makes sense. There's too many local laws, state by state, city, county, about facial recognition and license plate reading software that FEMA doesn't want to get into that. So they're just not, allowing you to use money to specifically get those things. Can't be used for general expenses to your organization. Key safes, Knox boxes, think like the little box. So if a house is for sale and it's got a box with a code that you can use to open a key to get in, can't use it for that. Proof of concepts or studies, like it's all about real things you're really going to buy, tangible, or at least training that is going to help, harden your facility. So it also can't pay for anything you already purchased. You cannot, in fact, you can't spend any money. We'll talk about this some more, but it's a reimbursement grant primarily. There is some avenue for an advance, but primarily it's a reimbursement grant, meaning like my church was approved for 2 physical addresses, almost 250 grand, 150 grand at one, almost 100 at the other. We spent 90,000 just recently buying all of the camera, door access, alarm stuff. And then I'm going to spend another 40 for the installation. And so I already cut a check for 90, and now I've submitted for reimbursement to get the 90 back from the state. This all came after I was approved for the grant and after we did some other things you have to do after you're approved before you can spend any money. So you need to know that you can't get money back for money that was already spent. And you also can't do anything, spend any money or get anything installed until you have full approval and a couple of other things. So keep that in mind as well. You also have to be in the facility that you're trying to get money for and using it. So it can't be like, hey, we're building our new building. It's going to open in 7 months. I'm going to apply next month for the grant. Probably not going to work because you check a box on the application saying that you're in there and you're using it. Okay. So applying for it. We'll come back to like 6 or 7 steps to apply for it, but just a general overview. One, you're going to determine your state administrative agency. That's really simple. You can just Google Nonprofit Security Grant Program. They have a list of the state administrative agencies and a person's name and an email. And so right away, I'd email them, say, hey, I'm Nick, or this church. We're looking to apply for the Nonprofit Security Grant, and ask any questions you want. Do you know when it'll open again? What can I start working on now? And all those things, just to kind of make contact, because that's the person you're going to ask questions to throughout this whole process. It is based on your physical building location or locations. So again, you're applying, you can do one application per address, up to 3 addresses per year. So if you had, like if a church had 3 locations, it could do all 3 up to 150 grand at the time that I'm recording this. It might be more or less in the future, but up to 150 grand per location times 3 locations, $450,000. But it's per physical address. So if you have, I think of my friend's church who's in Arizona and they have like 7 buildings on the property. Well, it's all one address. So they can't apply for multiple buildings because it's one physical address. So one address per application. Find your state administrative agency, determine their deadline. So again, at the very beginning of this video, I talked about like where we are in the midst of this. So the FEMA has their deadline of when the states need to submit all the applications to them, but that's not your deadline. Your deadline is whatever your state says. In my experience, states generally have deadlines somewhere between like April-ish and early June-ish, if things go like they're supposed to go. But every state's different. Texas, I love Texas. It's a great state. Big fan of Buc-ee's. Big fan of all kinds of things like barbecue in Texas. In fact, I'm thinking about the last barbecue I had in Texas. However, I am not a fan of the fact that in recent years, Texas has had a deadline for this that is so early that sometimes it's been earlier than the national announcement of the grant, which makes no sense to me. So, I don't think anybody's going to be surprised that Texas is kind of doing its own thing. But if I lived in Texas, if you live in Texas, I would email them and complain about that if that ever happens, because you want that deadline to come out after FEMA has announced the grant. You don't want the deadline to be like the last time I looked at it for the most recent year, Texas had a deadline in March, mid-March, and the country hadn't even passed the federal budget yet because it was delayed. And so anyway, you need to look at your state, see what that is. Most states are going to be within 5-6 weeks of each other. And so just depending on the timeline, but you can start working on it whenever. If you watched this webinar on, June 3rd and your state's deadline was June 1st, no problem. Start working towards next year so that you're ready. So I think that's really important. You also want to determine, we're going to talk about the things you need to apply, but some states, it's rare, but some states ask for additional items. So you just need to know that. So make sure you get that off their website so you're not surprised by that. Recently, the grant money was split into 2 funding streams, one for urban areas within every state and one for non-urban areas in every state. So what that means is I'm in Maryland. Baltimore is the only urban area in my state. My church is not in Baltimore City, but it is in Baltimore County. And that county and the next county in my state are part of the urban area. All that means is you fill out that application and you name it that way, and you're part of that funding stream. Anybody else that's in the non-urban area, they call it state, which I think is kind of confusing because the whole thing's the state. But anyway, you're either in the urban area or the non-urban area, which they call the state. Just look on the FEMA website. They determine those areas yearly. You can ask your state administrative agency, if your church is in the urban area or not. Typically, it's the major cities in a state. So, it would say Baltimore area or Denver area in Colorado or Atlanta area in Georgia or something like that. But sometimes it's hard to tell, are we in that or not? Are we too far out? and you can ask your state administrative agency for that. It's not going to make much of a difference in your application, but you need to fill out the right application, marked urban area if that's you, or state if you're not in the urban area. To apply, you need something called a UEI, a unique entity ID. This is an organizational ID used by the government and required as part of your application. Think of it as, I don't want to say, like federally organizations have EINs, which is kind of like a social security number for an organization. This isn't that, but it's similar. It's an ID that is unique to every organization, and they use it primarily for grant purposes, although there are some other reasons it gets used. But you need that to apply. You have to give them your UEI. You have to have one and put it in the application. So Google, and I would do this right away. Doesn't matter if you've got 11 months till the application's due. Do this right away, because if something comes up, you want time to fix it. Google get a UEI and take the steps necessary to get it for your organization. Most churches, this will be simple. You'll go in, log in, create an account, search for your church. It'll be there. The address will be right, and you'll apply and get it. However, like my church had moved once in the past 20 years. And then also we had office suites where like one time the suite letter was wrong. So when I logged in to get our UEI, the address wasn't right. It had the wrong suite thing, or I had to pick the old building. So neither one was technically right. So it took me more like 4 weeks to get it, because I had to get that fixed first, then get the UEI. So that's why you want to jump on it right away in case you have something like that. So now you're going to apply. You got the UEI, you found your state administrative agency. The application itself is called an investment justification, IJ for short. Most of the time, FEMA or whoever will call it the IJ. It is a fillable PDF, and you have to submit a couple other things with it, but that's the main thing, is this fillable PDF called the IJ. You have to edit it in Adobe Acrobat Reader. You can't like print it and write on it and scan it in. But that's the actual application that you're going to fill out. And then the timing, and we talked a little bit about this, but just to come back to it, in a normal year, the federal budget is passed. It can't be a continuing resolution, which is, when they say, hey, it's not really passed, but give us 30 more days. Can't be that. It's got to be the real budget, which then, that's how you know if there's money for this. And at that point, they'll have a notice of funding opportunity, which government loves abbreviations. So NOFO, NOFO. All that means is the announcement that, hey, the grant's open. That's what that means. So but that'll come usually about 60 days after the budget, or 30 days after the budget's approved. Then the application period will open up in every state. And that's typically open for 30 to 80 days. And that's when you can apply there. And then when your deadline hits, your state submits all of the applications to FEMA, at which point FEMA announces who gets the grant, usually a few months later. So in a normal year, it would be federal budget passed in January-ish, notice of funding in like March, applications open in April, due in May to early June, funding announced in late August to September. That would be a typical year, but it is all driven by the federal budget. So when you apply, your state requires typically 4 things. Now they'll say 3 things, because really it's the mission statement of your church. All that is used to validate that you're a church and not a school or a camp or whatever. So don't overthink that. It's get your mission statement on a copy of letterhead, save it as a PDF. Done. You got it. A vulnerability assessment, which we'll talk about in a moment. That's a key thing. Supporting documentation, which again, you may not have any. Most states don't require anything else. So this is the one that you may not even need. And then the actual application called the IJ, the investment justification. So it's really 3 things, but every now and then a state requires something else, an additional supporting documentation. So just make sure you know what your state requires. So FEMA in themselves, so you might submit the 3 things to your state, the mission statement, the IJ, and the vulnerability assessment. FEMA only looks at the IJ. They don't get the vulnerability assessment, and they don't get the mission statement. So don't ever put a note in your IJ saying, hey, refer to this. No, don't do that, because they're never going to get it. So you want to make sure everything you need them to know is in the IJ. And the IJ is detailed, long, has everything in there. So behind the scenes, your state scores your application. And you can Google the scoring matrix if you want to see that. Later on, I'll talk about a resource hub where we have a lot of this stuff. But they basically score it. You get a lot of bonus points for it being your first time applying. So that's why the first time you apply is a big deal, because your best chances of getting approved is the first time you apply. So my recommendation is apply for the max amount of money, because if you get it, that's going to be your best shot. Like if you apply down the road, you're not getting the bonus points because it'll be your second or third time. And so it's a little harder to get that. But behind the scenes, part of the process would be you submit your application to your state. They review and score it. They submit it to FEMA with any notes and their scores and all that. FEMA reviews it and they look at the scores and everything. And then they finalize who is going to get the award. And then the DHS secretary kind of approves that list, reports that to the state, who reports that back to you. So that's what's happening behind the scenes. As you apply for it, some tips include you could get a grant writer if you know of any. That's what this is essentially, is grant writing to fill out this application. I didn't do that. I don't think you need that. Be careful if you do that, or be careful if you use anybody that's not a part of your church, because your church is the one that's mostly responsible. So, even if somebody else does it, you're the ones responsible for it. You want to fully complete everything. I mean, that's a part of why grant writers exist, because it's just tedious. There's a lot of red tape. There's lots of instructions, easy ways to go wrong. So just make sure you complete everything. Make sure you ask only for allowable expenses. Don't say, hey, can we get a golf cart? Can we get, shirts for our security team? Like, these are not allowable things. Can we get firearms? Like, no, you know what I mean? Like, there's the list of allowable things. You can search on the FEMA website. They call them, there's a term called AEL, again, with these acronyms, authorized equipment list. And you can filter for the nonprofit security grant, and you can see what are all the categories of things you can get. Make sure you only ask for those approved things. And then only apply if you're a nonprofit, and don't apply on behalf of another organization. Like, they want only the actual organization applying. Not I'm applying on behalf of, so-and-so over here. Like, do that for yourself. You can get help for sure, but again, you're the ones responsible for it. I think it's important to start early and do multiple things simultaneously. Now, if you're watching this at a time when you've got months to plan for it, maybe not. Maybe you can do one thing at a time. If you're watching this and your deadline's in 2 weeks or 6 weeks, you want to be doing a lot of these things all at once. And we'll talk about all the things again, but kind of do things simultaneously. You want to connect the physical vulnerabilities of your facility to potential threats and risks and terrorism. So, for example, say your church has no cameras. Well, the vulnerability is you have no cameras. You have no surveillance, no recording, no history of what's happening or happening. And so then you're vulnerable that way, which means potentially somebody could attack and you wouldn't even know it till it's too late. Or if they came and vetted it before, you wouldn't even know that. So you just want to be able to tie, the application, and maybe I'll say this again later, but when you're filling out the application, it's almost like a 6 or 7 chapter novel where you're telling a story of, here's why we're vulnerable. Here's the threats that are out there for churches in general, but also for my church. Here's what would happen if we were attacked. Here's what we're going to do to mitigate that, getting this equipment and doing these things. And at the end, here's going to be the result. So you're kind of telling one story that all connects together. A lot of it will overlap, and you need to connect everything together. So connect the physical vulnerability to the threat that, is posed. You don't want to sole source contractors. What I mean by that is, don't just get one bid for cameras, get 3. Technically, a lot of states don't require this because it's under the amount of money that, a lot of you may have heard that, like, with government contracts, you have to get 3 quotes. That is true. But in some cases, there's a minimum. And in some cases, that minimum is like $250,000. It might be more than what you're applying for, so it doesn't apply to you. However, I recommend you get at least 3 quotes of everything, just to be above board and, make sure you're doing it the right way. Make sure everything aligns and is logical, reasonable, and attainable, right? So again, don't apply for things that are just crazy or, it's just not going to make any sense. Don't ask for more than the funding cap. It was 150,000 in recent years per physical address. Don't ask for 175. Use Adobe Acrobat to edit the form. You have to. I mean, for one, you won't even be able to open it. Like you'll see if you download a sample IJ and you just try to just double click and open it on Mac or PC, a lot of times it'll open it in your default reader and it won't work. It'll have a little paragraph telling you need to open this in Adobe Acrobat. So you need to download it, go find it on your computer, and then download Adobe Acrobat Reader. And you might even have to like right click, choose open with Adobe Acrobat. And you'll know, because when it opens right, it's got all the stuff there. It's got fields that you can type in. And you want to do that the right way. I helped the church camp actually, who failed. They applied, but they didn't get it. And right off the bat, I was like, well, yeah, you didn't use the official form. Somebody pulled this into some other PDF editor and typed in it and then saved it. And then that's an automatic fail. You can't do that. They also didn't check a key box. So there's like certain things. It's like, you don't want to fail for the simple things. Get help from others for sure. We'll talk about how we can help you with that. Update your vulnerability assessment every 5 years. It doesn't have to be every year, but maybe every 5 years. And we'll talk about the vulnerability assessment in a minute. Stay updated with your state administrative agency. Who's the contact? When are the deadlines? Avoid conflicts of interest. So for example, you could totally have a company help you apply for this, and maybe they sell cameras and maybe you use them on the back end if you get the grant. That's not bad as long as you are sourcing other quotes and theirs is competitive. You're not just selling it to your brother, at an increased rate to give him the business. You know what I mean? You want to avoid conflicts of interest that way. Okay, let's talk vulnerability assessments. This is a key part of the application. So there's the application, the IJ, your mission statement, simple, and then the vulnerability assessment. This can be done by local police, Department of Homeland Security, retired military. You can do it yourself. There's a self-assessment tool that you can search for. It's on the CISA website, CISA. And I wish I could give you the exact name of that off the top of my head right now, but there's a self-assessment there where you can do your own assessment of your facility. You could type up a Google Doc, a Word doc, and just, put your own thoughts. My recommendation is to try to get somebody from DHS, which you can go on their site, contact the general email, ask for somebody can come do a vulnerability assessment, and they'll usually send you to whoever does it for your area, and then they'll schedule and come out if they can. The reason I prefer that is because they know things you don't know. They know things police officers don't know. Like they'll tell you, things that you need to check out or think about that you hadn't thought about. I don't think that makes it better than if you did your own self-assessment in terms of like, it's not like FEMA is saying, oh, a DHS person did this, give them more points. They don't even get the vulnerability assessment. Your state does. And I don't know if they weight that or not. I'm not really sure, but I had a DHS person do our one building and a local police officer do our other one. And she wasn't even just a standard local police officer. She works on a joint terrorism task force with DHS and does this. So that's my top choice. But if you can't get DHS to do it, get a local police officer, retired military, whatever. Can't do that. Do it yourself with the self-assessment tool. But here's the thing that matters. Well, a lot of it matters, but make sure the address matches the address of your building, which matches the address of the application. Make sure everything you want done is in the vulnerability assessment. So one mistake I made was I talked with the DHS guy about how we want to get contract security. He was like, yep, you can do that. He did not put it in the vulnerability assessment though. He didn't mention it as a vulnerability, the fact that we were lacking, personnel, contract security personnel. I didn't notice that. So I asked for it. So then when it came time to apply, they wrote me back and told me, hey, you can't ask for this. It's not in your vulnerability assessment. And fortunately, they let me take it out and resubmit the form because they could have just failed me. You know what I mean? So you want to make sure, what I recommend is you make a list of everything you want done. Cameras, doors, windows, whatever, fence. And then you take that checklist and tell them about it when they're doing the assessment, whoever it is. And then after they're done, go through it again to make sure it's all in there. That way you can get everything that you want to get from it. Okay, next steps. Here's what I would recommend if you want to apply for the grant. And again, I'll tell you how we can help you at the end. One, there's a FEMA webinar. They do them all the time. They kind of have ones that are like in season when it's about to be application time. They have when the application's open, they have one, and then they even do it during what I would call the off season, typically June to December, when it's not open right now, but it's going to be. It's great to watch one of those. You're going to hear a lot of the same stuff I'm telling you, but it's great to just learn that from the source. Contact your state administrative agency, get that set up and rolling. Get your UEI. That's a big part of it, right? Get that UEI number, Google that, and start working on that. Do your vulnerability assessment. Who's going to do it? When are they going to do it? They're going to go through your whole buildings, and complete a whole vulnerability assessment. That'll take a little bit of time. Maybe you want to contact DHS like I recommended. Set a reminder for the notice of funding opportunity. Like if it's not open when you're watching this, you want to set a reminder to figure out when is it open and keep checking, and sign up for your state's email list so they email you when it opens, all those things. Start working on the application. I think you can even start working on the application now. Like imagine that you're watching this when it's not open. You could start working on one now, get like last year's application, save it. And then when the new ones opens up, you'll need to use the new application, but you could just copy paste. You know what I mean? That way you're not waiting. Sorry about that. You're not waiting until it's totally open before you start working on it. I love the idea of working on it in advance so that you aren't behind the 8 ball. We've helped a lot of churches apply for it quickly, like in 2 weeks. You can totally do it. But man, is it better if you've got 6-7 months? You can work on that, take your time, and not have to cram for it. And then last, you can consider getting help from us if you would like. This is not something you have to do, but if you would like to get help from us, you may have seen this webinar because of a Facebook ad. Somebody commented on it originally and said they applied for this grant. The grant process was so difficult. We partnered with 12 churches in our city to collaborate with, and no one was able to complete the process. Good luck to all. It's almost like a little ominous, isn't it? And my comment was, yeah, it isn't easy, which is why we want to help. You can totally do it on your own. I did. I mean, I had some help because I heard about it, from somebody else, but I made a lot of mistakes along the way, and it takes a lot of time. If you want to save on that, if you want to give yourself the best shot, we can help you with our nonprofit security grant guide. This is basically 2 things. It's an online resource hub with documents, links, walkthrough videos of me going through the application and what you need to do there, and the vulnerability assessment, going through the mistakes that churches typically make and how not to make those, links to all the resources. So that's part of it. And then the other part is you get coaching calls with us. And typically the way that would work is we'll do one coaching call right away to kind of help you get started. Okay, here's your state. Here's what you need to do. Here's your deadline, all that. And then we'll do a second coaching call when you have filled out your application and your vulnerability assessment and all that. And we'll go over it with you. And I can tell you, I've just done about 35 of these in the last couple months. 2/3 of the time, probably more than that, probably 3/4 of the time, I have thoughts like about which people should change or adapt to make their application better. And I would say at least 1/3 of the time, maybe even half, there's mistakes where it's like, oh, you can't do that. You need to fix that. And which is easy. That's why their grant writers exist, right? Because it's so easy to mess these things up. So if we can help you with that, by all means, you could check out the Nonprofit Security Grant Guide. It has resources like I talked about, files, videos, coaching calls, how-to instructions, all that. And like I talked about the coaching calls you can do. We say 2. If you need 3 or 4, it's fine. We just say 2 coaching calls just so it's not 20 coaching calls. It's $297 for that and the coaching. Just go to ministryboost.org/security to check that out. But again, if you want to try to do that on your own, totally get that. That's fine too. If you do get that, there's a separate Q&A in that thing where you can watch a video of us answering questions about all of this whole process. And so, that could help you out. But I hope this Okay, so hopefully this webinar has been helpful to you to help you figure out, okay, what is this grant? How can we apply for it? What can we get with it? And how can we, give ourselves the best shot at getting it? The guide, can help you. If you want our help, go ahead and get that guide. One of the first things you'll do is schedule a coaching call with us. Doesn't matter whether the deadline's next week or 7 months from now. We can help you get started to apply for this grant, give your church the best shot at it. I'm encouraged by the fact that, you know, in a recent year, half the churches got it. That's already pretty good odds. And I think with our help, and if you really do this well and do it right, I think your odds are a lot better than 50%. It's not 100%, it's not guaranteed. My church didn't get it the first time and then got it the second time for no other reason. But I think if you go into that with that mindset that we're going to keep applying until we get it, then you'll be in good shape. So that's it for the webinar. If we can help you out and get the guide, reach out to us, schedule your first call. And even if you don't help us, or even if you don't get our help, I hope you get it. Email us, info@ministryboost.org, and just let us know if you got it. I'd be curious to know. So good luck. And I hope your church gets the grant, not just once, but maybe multiple times down the road so you can help make it more secure.